Hey everybody. If it's morning time, good morning. If it's evening, good evening. And welcome to another essential conversation here at Wellbeings. And we got Dr. Alex back in the house. Hi, Doctor. Welcome.
Hi. Hello, everyone.
And today we're going to talk about why is there a rise in lonely single men in the world? And it's, with all the dating apps that are out there, there's a lot of content that can gather information, and it shows that that the 62% of men that's on the dating sites there's more men looking for women, and that also shows that there is 55%, 50, I think it's 56 in the US percent, sort of more single men than women in the world, or maybe it's 68 or 60, and it's on the rise. That was a research that was done in 2019, and when I was back in Ireland, I met a lot of single men in my groups, my men's groups and mixed groups. We have a lot of single men, and I really wanted to explore this with you today, Doctor, because it feels like, apart from men needing help here, I want to explore another part to it, is like, how can we also help women understand where men are as well? So I think it's like men, definitely there's an invitation for growth here on many levels. And one of the things that they said, and when I was reading an article lately, it was that men are not the best communicators. And that is one of the, and with your history of when you have people coming into your clinic and couples, and is this a trend that you're seeing as well? Like it's definitely something that's inflaming the relationship, the lack of communication.
Yes and no. It's a complicated answer, I think. I think we are in an evolutionary stage right now, because are men not good communicators, or is this a gender issue where we don't teach our boys to be better communicators, our girls to be better listeners? We know that in infancy, that male babies are born less mature than female babies when it comes to the ability to read faces. So girl babies read faces very quickly, like almost right off the bat, and it takes boys longer. So that's why boys are fussier. They're harder to regulate. That's why there's these old wives' tales like, oh, you're having a boy. Boys are so much harder than girls. Well, it's harder because they don't have the internal capacity yet. They definitely catch up. So it's sort of, some of this is biologically encoded. But then if we hold this notion that boys aren't verbal, or boys don't communicate, or they don't have their feelings, then we don't really help them in those areas either to be better listeners, to be better communicators. So that's one aspect of it.
So Doc, let me expand on that. I love that. And let's take, for example, so there's a like, that's one of example of a clear gender difference that's right there. So in this evolving world where we're wanting to be equal in gender, like there's ideals running around. We hear it on social media where everyone wants equality, and they should be the same. That's an oversight to a degree. It's like, like it's saying like women can do all construction jobs, but they just don't have the physicality to be able to do that. And yes, it's a nice idea for equality, but in some areas, due to gender, some things are more in one direction than the other. So this is a blind spot, I think. And then let's add to that comparison, because in the old days, you could compare who's in the village or who's in the town or who's in the college, and now with social media, the woman is also comparing to a bigger audience from around the world of what a man is supposed to be, or seeing stuff in different forms. So it can be confusing.
Well, there's also something in what you said that I would just want to correct a little bit, and that is people are different. There are plenty of women that are much more capable of construction work than some guys, right? Seriously. And especially if it's a guy who's smaller, slight, not very musculature, where you've got a female who's, heavily musculature and stronger. So even within gender, like my sister's very good at detail-oriented things with her hands. She does petty point and she can make little models of things. And I can't do anything. I can't do any of that. Like I would smash all of it. That's not my strength. So in some ways, it's about gender, but it's not. It's that we are all so very different. And I think that's the thing that we have to consider and honor. And then one of the problems is when people get together in relationship, they don't start to talk about what they value, right? What their agreements are, what kind of relationship they want to have, to find out if this person has those capacities or interests or doesn't. Right. But so then we reduce it to, well, men are this way, men are from Mars and women are from Venus.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's too simplistic of a bifurcation. That we have to start to really consider how unique and different each human being is. And it's gnarly. It really is, because everybody's a cause. Everybody feels marginalized. Everybody wants a voice and wants to be heard. But it's like, well, what about just our humanity?
I love that. I love that. And yeah, I'll take you back to about 6 months ago. And, I was in a supermarket and I bumped into some old friends from 20 years ago who were single men. Now, these men have been single. They were never married. They might have dated. They, and I read a couple of articles lately, and they said that the single men in America who are single and lonely are men are of low income. And I think they give them an umbrella of being in low income. And I had met that with these guys. They were, they were working, but they were working week to week. And as I talked to them, they were happy enough. They were hanging out with the boys. They could felt like they were happy with their teenager friends and stayed in that zone. And they seemed kind of content with the carry out of alcohol, and that was what they were doing.
Right.
And it impacted me a lot. And it I hadn't seen the particular people in about 20 years. And,
wow.
And yeah, I I was like, okay, well, that's what it is. And one of the guys followed me out to the car, and he says, hey, he says, I hear your therapist. He says, like sometimes I feel a little bit depressed. And I says, yeah, man, it's important to thank you for sharing that and give me a call. But what I wanted to really share there is that I had seen it in my therapy groups, and when I went back to my hometown, as I was going through the time I was there, I met numerous single men, a few single women, but a lot of single men, and I was just really curious about that. And one of the things that that's been popping up in my groups is that men feel they have some anxiety towards approaching women after it's been left for long periods of time. They feel hurt by women, or they felt too nervous to open up again. So a nervous anxiety, and also a sort of, just a fear, and a belief that it's better to be isolated than to open up to something new. It felt too daunting for them. And these were successful men as well. They were just, there was this theme that I would see where they had given up on that. There was a hurt that was being avoided.
That's really sad, because that's giving up on oneself and giving up on intimacy. And we're not taught, nor do we learn really from each other along the way, about how difficult relationships really are. That everybody gets into a relationship bringing their family of origin with them. And we say things like, well, this is just the way it's supposed to be. Like, you're supposed to do that and I'm supposed to do this because that's how it was in my household, without ever questioning, who are you? What do you want? And what do we think? And how do we want to design our relationship? And so people make the big mistake of not having a conversation about what kind of relationship they want to have, and that what are going to be the rules of how they govern that relationship. So Stan Tatkin talks about this in his well-regarded book, Wired for Love, just how people get together and we're all so different and none of us are in the right relationship, right? Because it's challenging. It takes an enormous amount of work. But if we don't know what the rules of engagement are going in, we can't really help each other along the way. And so we end up being, mean, or angry, or saying things that undermine the relationship, that hurt the other person, without having a directive of kindness being the overarching directive. And that doesn't mean that we are going to be kind 24/7. We won't be. We will violate that. But do we repair it? And how quickly do we repair it is what's crucial to the longevity of a relationship. So that's one part of it.
Yeah, I like that when you said like none of us, none of or almost all relationships, that it's normal to think in a way that this isn't the right relationship at some stage.
Always, yeah.
It's like, and it's like the same as being another way that I notice within myself at times is the way in which I think about, just this way my psyche works sometimes. It's like, it's never enough sometimes. There's always like this thing. It's like, yeah, I need to do something else. Or, it's like, there's always this sort of dynamic that's in the atmosphere of wanting to do more on some level, or it's not good enough. And same within a relationship is at times there's this little, this part that rises up in us. And let's talk about that part that rises up, that's disappointed or hurt or overwhelmed.
I think that's an invitation to grow. Instead of, I can't get it right in this relationship. I always have to do something more. It's more about what opportunity is there here for me to look at where maybe I do fall short. Moving from an I to a we is very challenging. And in securely functioning relationships, it's all about the good of the whole. So what's good for me is good for you. And if it's not good for you, I shouldn't be doing it. As opposed to going behind your back, lying to you, trying to soft sell it to you. If it's really going to be good for you, then I have to convince you that it's going to be good for you. Right? Why is it good for me to go out with my girlfriends once a month? Because it makes me happy. It makes me feel less isolated. I get to laugh. I get to maybe feel a little bit of my sexuality outside of the relationship in a boundaried way. And then when I come home, I'm happy and I'm excited to see you. So therefore, it's good for you. If I'm taking off and I don't tell you where I'm going and I'm always gone and I'm out with my girlfriends and you are insecure, nervous, don't know where I am, it's not good for you. And therefore, I shouldn't be doing it. So those aren't great examples necessarily, but that's a hard idea for people to wrap their head around. So if you're in a relationship with someone and they don't like something you're doing, you have to really sit down face to face, eyeball to eyeball, and have a conversation about that.
Yeah, what I call it is, stamp collecting,
How so?
Stamp, in the old days in Ireland, you'd collect stamps and you'd get an old kettle at the end of the month in the post office.
That's right.
And but what I'm talking about here is you collect resentments. They build up to give you guilt-free tantrums, or outwardly or inwardly. And that's sort of the games that we play that then confirm sort of dynamics where you could confirm, I'm not seen, but then you're not allowing yourself to be seen.
Right. And that's great for addicts because, they say all an alcoholic needs is a good resentment to drink. Those are easy to find.
there's quite a few alcoholic games that
Yeah.
addicts use, so for sure. And what I find is, this, trying to be in a relationship, and for example, one classic that is an Irish one here is where you have the selfless mother, that
Mm,
the women and the men learn from, this
yeah.
woman, mother who overextends or over compensates and is angry and annoyed
She's
and
a martyr. Yeah.
and then like and then we learn that somehow as a way of how
Mm,
to relate, and yeah, rescuing and fixing and overdoing and all this compensative behavior that builds up animosity and anxiousness
right.
and resentment.
And that actually creates maternal enmeshment, is what that does, because the boy then feels responsible for the mother's happiness and her needs, and simultaneously is enraged by it because she's making him feel inadequate. And that can lead to sexual inadequacy as an adult, also. Ken Adams writes about this in his beautiful book. There are two of them, Silently Seduced, and the other one's called When He's Married to Mom. And he talks about this disloyalty bind, that the boy can never really leave mom for a girlfriend and potentially a wife because he feels so guilty about it. So emancipating oneself, from the mother is crucial to becoming an adult male. And that happens with boundaries. Like, you don't talk to her every day. When she's running a guilt trip, you let her go to her adult friends, her girlfriends, her husband, partner, whatever. But you are not responsible for running and caretaking to her every 2 minutes, because that hampers men from really having relationships as an adult with an adult woman.
Well, it keeps the adult in a child place,
That's right.
and it keeps that child dynamic,
Hierarchy. Yeah.
and then you got that child who's going into a relationship then as a child, or hiding, or he is a adult hiding the fact that he's a child,
Yeah.
and it's so what. So just for our viewers out there, I think it's what we're really talking about here is just how there could be a lot going on under the bonnet sometimes, and how we
Mhm.
relate to our partners. For example, in my relationship, my wife is very well. I kind of married a little bit like my mother, and I didn't realize it. I went to the other end of the world and I met this
We
woman.
all do it.
I had to go to the jungle in Indonesia, and I found my mom. And what I mean by that is that there's a sweetness and a tenderness, and at times selflessness. That
Right.
that for me, that is so, whoa! It's such a beautiful thing. It's like there's a hue of familiar love in that dynamic, but I would have to not take advantage of that for my job. I
Mm,
know that anyone who overextends too long, then it does not work. It's not
right.
balanced. So it'd be like pausing the gestures, pausing the off, not always saying yes to her, wanting to help, and explaining and creating space for her to have needs, to wake up in the morning and say, well, what can I do to support you and you accomplishing your needs today? Because if I didn't, at times she would focus on my daughter, or focus on wanting to do something lovely for me, and
Mhm.
that doesn't work long term.
Yeah, right, because it feels resentful, and, like, also can leave a woman feeling like she's not valued, or, what she's doing in the world doesn't have meaning, whereas, raising a child is probably the most meaningful thing a person can do on the planet today. Um, but yes, that becomes problematic, and I think from the male's perspective, for anyone who's listening to this, to ask yourself hard questions about, what is my relationship with my mother really like? What did I learn about women from this woman? And it's not just psychological, it's the way our brains get wired and encoded. We recognize home wherever we are. Just like you said, you can go to the jungles of Indonesia and you will find the one woman that is like your mother, because you recognize that as safety, security, the amount of intimacy you can tolerate, all of it. So that's important, because it's also important for men to admit when they're really angry at women. because otherwise they act it out sexually, or they act it out by isolating, avoiding women, when really, they have a lot of rage that they couldn't express as kids. And it's important to express it in a healthy container, so you can start to free yourself of it, and be in an egalitarian relationship with someone.
I love, Doc, how we've come around to this idea also of how one of the reasons, possibly, and there's going to be multiple reasons, but one of the reasons possibly to why there's such a real, like, steady increase in single lonely men, and we can come back to loneliness and what that is in a little bit, and it's their relationships with their mother. Or the where they haven't emotionally left home yet, or
Right.
where it's connected. There's something there. There has to be something there in that department.
Well, they either get enmeshed with their mother, so the mother's suffocating. It's too much. She makes the son her surrogate spouse, if you will, where she's getting all of her emotional needs met from him because he's delicious and she loves him, and he's a little boy. But when he starts to go into puberty, she doesn't relinquish him to the men in her world and let the men raise him. She keeps teaching him how to have her feelings, and it does not go well. And the opposite of that is a mother, of course, who's completely abandoning, whether she's depressed or psychotic or alcoholic or just not there. So the enmeshment creates a love avoidance, a fear of intimacy, because men feel so suffocated by that. And the abandonment can create more of a love addiction, a deep, endless desire to be wanted, to be needed, to be cared for, because they just didn't get that. So those are extreme polarities. And Pia Mellody writes about this in her book, Facing Love Addiction. You can see those cycles in that book really laid out nicely. So to ask yourself, where on the continuum did you fall? Because when men cannot get into a relationship, it's because they are either mother enmeshed or they were abandoned by their mothers, not because they grew up in a securely functioning household, right, where it was appropriate.
Yeah, I had a guy this week, and he had children to two different women, and he had lost both of his children due to his inability to hold down a job, and his sort of like lifestyle was a little bit wild, and
Right.
And he came from a mother that abandoned him in a way that was very cruel. And as we worked together, I realized I don't know what was more painful: the mother abandoning him, or what at times I'm imagining these single men where they self-abandon.
Well, yes, it becomes a repetition compulsion, right?
Yeah.
These are adaptive strategies, again, in the brain and in the nervous system. So this guy wouldn't be able to tolerate a woman that was really loving and kind and available to him. He would push her away because his nervous system cannot take it in. And he probably has a lot of dissociated rage and panic also.
Yeah, he described the women like witches, like his mother.
Wow.
Like they were cruel and evil and cunning, and all these things that, as he was sharing, it was like a child telling me about a fairy tale.
Yeah, but it's real for him.
Absolutely.
Because that's how wicked she was. So why would he possibly trust women? Women are a source of danger for him.
And that's what he had said. He says, "You know what? I've just decided to give up."
Yeah, that's unfortunate that he's giving up on himself.
Yeah.
As opposed to saying, I'm not giving up. I don't know what the future holds for me, but I'm not going to further abandon the child that was so deeply abandoned. And cruelty was perpetrated on this child because now he's reenacting her cruelty. You see, he's being loyal to her by giving up. And so he stays in relationship with her. It doesn't matter where in the world she is, he's following her directive. And so she wins.
Yeah, exactly. And she was in the background of all these breakups and involved in different
Oh,
ways.
yeah.
And I said to him, well, you know what? I hear you. I hear you giving up on yourself, but you know, that's my job to hold that potential for you, and I'll hold that belief that you have the possibility of finding and being with yourself more, and then in time being with a partner. I'll hold
Right.
that for you until you're ready to hold it for yourself.
Right, because until he gets in relationship with himself and falls in love with himself, he cannot put it together with a partner. And one of the first steps is, not having communication with this mother that's so wicked. She has no business in his life whatsoever as an adult.
This is a good question as well, that you're bringing up here, and this is one I get heard often. I say, when do you, and this is from clients, like, when do you know that it's time to break away from the mother? What I mean is, like, to cut the mother off.
Yeah.
Because there's, and again, I have people coming into me. I'll come into therapy with you, Nigel, but you know what? I don't want therapy to be that I have to then be able to heal these wounds and then march in and give mom a hug, because that ain't happening. Like, so what would be for, because sometimes there are really destructive relationships.
Yeah.
Everybody in our lives, including our parents at times, and sometimes irreparably, they're very damaging.
Right.
How would you respond if somebody was, in this case, this guy's mother was violent, abusive, on
Right.
every front,
Well, I would
sexual?
say he's in a trauma bond with her. He's trauma bonded to her, and he keeps reenacting that. So the first step for him is to be able to, admit and to get to how bad it actually really was. And then to make a decision to cut off communication with her. It doesn't have to be forever. Because look, she did the best she could do. She's distorted. She sounds mentally ill, quite frankly. And so he can't have her in his life. It's like an alcoholic who wants to stop drinking but is working in a bar. It just doesn't work like that. You have to get away from the bar. So he's going to have to make a hard decision to not have contact with her. And he's going to start to feel the upset, the discomfort of that. And that's the beginning stages of starting to reclaim himself. I think with a lot of guys, it comes down to, you can't just have this sort of hard cutoff. It's very difficult for people. It's a slow dialing back. If she's, calling you every day, can you start to talk to her every other day? Can that move to a couple times a week? Or can you say to her, you know what, I just need a break for a month. I don't want to talk to you for a month. If anything comes up, I'll let you know. But writing a letter, and this might be a good exercise even for a men's group, is for everyone to write a letter to their mother that's a no send letter, right? A letter of what you appreciate, what she gave you, but the ways in which she hampered or harmed you, or stunted your growth. So people can really see what's true for them. And your mother's not going to die because you're honest about what effect she had on you. And it also doesn't make her a bad person. This isn't a witch hunt against your mother. This is just about being honest about the impact she had on you, because she probably didn't know any better. She was probably abused growing up also. I mean, this is just an intergenerational transmission of trauma. And we have the opportunity in this day and age to say the buck stops here. I'm going to get to the bottom of this. I'm going to understand what happened, feel into my feelings so I don't have to transmit it to my children. Or at the very least, I can go on to have a healthy relationship. So that emancipation from the mother is crucial for men to reclaim their sexual adequacy, their sense of themselves, and to choose a woman that's not going to perpetrate on them in the same way, because they're the ones that are repeating it, no one else.
And that's a really good statement, to choose a different woman in partnership. And how to do that, I think, is by, and you used the term like learning to love yourself, but what I add to that would be learning to love the parts you learn not to love, like learning embrace the helplessness as men. Many men listening out there, like, find a space where you can feel safe to feel that aloneness, which I want to come back to, the helplessness, the sort of fears, the anger. And you talked about anger in a relationship, how important it is to be expressed, where we can ask our partner to be angry with us, not where we're angry at them. Like, can you be with me in my anger, as opposed to like being angry at them?
Yeah.
Like, we can get in touch with these parts of ourselves, because other than that, it's often just rinse and repeat.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah, and that's a disintegrated sense of self. And what we're looking for is an integrated sense of self, where all parts of you are available to you, not having them sequestered or cordoned off, right? Or living in the shadows, as it were. And when children are neglected or abused in any way, parts of themselves get dissociated or repressed, meaning the brain literally uncouples in a certain way. And that's when people report feeling, chronically, like a chronic low-grade depression, or anxious, or dead internally, not really connected. And so they start replicating the drama they grew up with, the intensity, because they want to feel something.
Yeah.
Right? It's sort of like the person who cuts. They cut because they feel dead inside, and they want to feel pain is better than deadness.
Or even something that's less, where it may not sound that's a little bit lower lining that, but also equally as destructive, is where, and in the group this week we had a woman's, we had a man sharing about a dynamic where his wife was getting angry at him, and he was saying to this bloody woman, she's always getting angry at me, and then this was a group that was together for a long time. Right. And I said, hey guys, can you give some feedback to, let's call this person John, it's not his real name. And one of the people in the group says, well, you know what, John, like, you always, your chair is always out of the circle, like, you're always far away. I always feel like I have to kind of raise my voice at you sometimes.
Interesting.
I'm always finding that I want to get your attention, but I never can. I never feel you, so I find that I also want to raise my voice. So he got like 4 different versions of that from men and women. So what happens sometimes is, if we're withdrawn and pulled in and not being present with our partners, or then sometimes the other one will create a dynamic that will pull you in, and sometimes that's through conflict.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, people usually raise their voice when they feel like they're not being heard. So yes, we will find very clever ways to communicate with each other that aren't always constructive.
Yeah.
And that's why I think, really understanding your partner, what they need, being committed to their care, being committed to make sure that they're okay so that you're okay, is no easy feat. Right? Because again, it's about being in a 2-person system, not in a 1-person system, where we're just living together in our own orbits and throwing jabs at each other, because the relationship sours quickly when that happens. There are all these resentments. Somebody ends up cheating or leaving or divorcing, and then the conclusion is, all men are this or all women are that, as opposed to wherever I go, there I am. What am I doing? Why do I keep replicating this? What is the core problem here? Whether it's, my fear or insecurity or my lack of willingness to really take care of another human being.
And I think the capacity to do that is based on our own ability to want to take care and look and get to know who we are as humans, that's really fundamental. And I love what you said earlier. It kind of felt a sparkly sort of aliveness when you were talking about, and I felt that you also saying that you did it, that you do this. I go out with the girls once a month, and I get that sort of, that energy, that pizzazz, that sort of youthful vibe again, and I'm getting what I hear there is like, you're getting resourced.
Yes.
And it's so important that you bring that freshness back into the relationship again. And one way to add to a breakup in a relationship is again a sort of like cabin fever where it's all in and it's all
Right.
yeah.
Which is fine in the early stages where you just can't keep your hands off each other, right? But over time, I would be very disturbed if my partner just sat on the couch and watched TV all the time and didn't have hobbies or friends or interests, right? Because it just makes the relationship so much interesting. There's so much more to talk about and to think about, and to notice that this other person in front of me is growing and changing all the time, as opposed to I know what he's going to say and I know what he does all the time, which is just this sort of collapsed dead energy. Because the truth is we don't know what our partner is going to say from moment to moment. We don't even know ourselves well, let alone the other. What we do, because our brains are very fast and very automatic, we tend to fill in the blanks quickly, very quickly, and we make errors all the time in those filling in the blanks. Right? I don't know what you're going to say. So how do I stay curious? How do I stay patient? How do I stay interested? And these are all things that we learn in relationships. So for those who are isolated, for those who have given up, to a single life, you're actually depriving yourself of growing. Your brain, your nervous system, you're depriving yourself of evolving and changing. Because it really is additive to be in relationship. We are not meant to be isolated creatures. And it really doesn't matter what kind of relationship it is, whether it's monogamous or polyamorous, married, not married, but being with other people and relating to them and grappling with your issues and working through disagreements is a big part of what keeps us vital and alive.
Absolutely. I had a journey one time in my life, and I thought I was going to find out this whole thing about getting enlightened or like really fast track my personal development. And I did a 60-day silent retreat in the mountains in Burma, and I realized I felt some grace. I had some nice moments, but I realized in that moment that I needed someone there with me. For my growth to really happen for me now. It was easy. It was like it seemed like something I did many lifetimes before, to sit and to be with the stillness. But I really realized that I could only go so far with getting in touch with my parts of me when I was all by myself. And I realized that my depth and my growth happened when I was able to sit with someone and feel their solid ground. It made me feel safer to go deeper into my own being. And that exchange, that fundamental thing, it was such a stark reality in my young days when I realized that I needed people to do this thing. And,
That's really nice, because there is a whole line of thinking for people who go to ashrams and practice meditation. There are people that are renunciates. They give up all of the pleasures of life purely to hone and develop their spiritual practices and awarenesses. And I don't think we're talking about that. For people that choose that path, it's your life and you can choose whatever path you want. I think we're talking more about a middle ground here for those of us that walk in the world, that are householders, that have jobs, but that isolate at home alone with a computer, or worse yet, endless amounts of pornography, and don't connect with other human beings. Just how much that actually distorts the human brain and body, which is different than being, dedicated to a path of meditation and spiritual awakening.
The thing for me was that, those are great practices to have, but for me, being alone and isolated, whether it was in a mountain meditating, or whether it's in my house, not seeing friends, there's a line where you need space to be with yourself, and
solitude.
And then that was very quickly realized that when that becomes isolation for me, it did not support growth, and it colluded with avoidance, and it colluded with old stories and sort of dynamics that just didn't really suit anymore. It didn't feel right. So I really, what I see with the single men is a sort of real, like 85% of them, they all isolate. There's a huge isolation factor and a sort of comfortableness in their cave that turn to.
Well, that's why I think a couple things come up when you say that, Nigel. One is, the power of 12-step groups, why men do so well in 12-step, because there's a fellowship. It's why men join, football teams and play soccer and engage in team sports. It's also
sense of
why,
belonging.
we also know that men live longer when they are in a relationship, because they need, care and attention and affection. Men are incredibly sensitive creatures on some level. Men are like coconuts, right? Hard on the outside and much softer on the inside than we think. And women are more like hard-boiled eggs. We look fragile on the outside, but we're pretty tough on the inside. Um, so we misconstruct gender. And I know that's sort of gender reductive, what I just
Yeah.
said, but it paints a picture, actually, right? And so I think it's important for men to honor that, what you're saying, that I need other people. I need the comfort of a partner, whether it's male or female. I want to be touched. I want to be loved. I want to laugh with somebody. It's not just about sex, it's about companionship. And so if you're isolated and you're listening to this, how can you risk one thing this week? What do you have to risk to go make contact with somebody, whether it's to take a walk with them or have a coffee with them, and not worry about your performance, or anything about who you are, just about making a human connection with somebody. Something that simple can start to create change.
Yeah, that's great advice. And yeah, and just just to kind of take a step back from what you said to some of the blockades that could happen and would inhibit, because not this week, the week before, one of the guys in one of the groups says, and I said, like, hey, why is it so compelling to be so isolated? And his response was, I'm really terrified of affection.
That's beautiful.
That
he admitted that. Yes.
Well, he's been in the group for a year and a half, so he
Okay.
kind of got to that sort of safety with us, and
Right.
so just again to the viewers out there that if we're feeling that we have any sort of hostility in us, we maybe got that hand me downs from our fathers or from our mothers, and we're like kind of hostile or lonely or like kind of moody and broody and those states, like it's hard to believe that affection exists, in the world, when you're in that schema, and I asked him, I says, what happened, man? Like, what happened? And he says he never got it.
Yeah.
He's terrified of it. It feels like it's way too scary, to open up to something like that. And, and this guy he's never had a relationship.
Oh, sure. How could he?
He's probably, might have held somebody's hand at one stage, but the real innocent, beautiful man. But yeah, terrified of what could happen if he opens up to this whole part of him that gets closed down. Because again, to the single lonely men, there's a part of you that's closed down. There's a part of you that's contracted on some level. And yeah, I'm curious to know. And definitely, if any of you are listening, send us some messages, because like, what is it that we're protecting while we're in the cave? Like, what is that? And what do you think about that, Doc?
Well, a couple of things. One, we have two nervous systems: the central nervous system, which is comprised of our brain and our spinal cord, and our eyeballs are, part of the brain. And then the autonomic nervous system, which is the body. And that has two different branches to it also. So when the body is not touched, it doesn't build capacity. It would be just like if you were, if you remember the Romanian orphans that were not attended to at all in the orphanage when they found them, those children were really in somewhat of a vegetative state, because there was no data streaming in through the central nervous system, no eye contact, no sound of voice, no play, no contact of any kind. And that's essential for us to grow and change. Our brains need that kind of contact to mature from infancy all the way through life, really. And likewise with our bodies. And the body is as plastic as the brain is. So this guy would have to start with tolerating touch, like somebody just touching the top of his hand, stroking the top of his hand. What does that feel like? What are you noticing in your body? Oh my God, my heart's racing, or I feel like I want to throw up. So let's just stay with that, because the autonomic nervous system can build capacity to take in more and more touch. So with this group, it might be useful to start to ask him, if he can tolerate a hug.
Yeah,
Right?
he's refused them, but
Okay.
but he can allow someone to touch his shoulder.
That's
Feel
great.
safe.
So can everybody touch his shoulder at the end of every group when they say goodbye to him? And then what's that like for him when everybody does that? My guess is he's going to go into shame. He's going to feel dirty. He feels like he doesn't deserve it. All of those feelings have to come to the foreground, or you obviously as a therapist can't work with them. And that's what people need to hear that are listening, that if you don't activate what is dead, what's hidden, there's no way a therapist can help you, because there's no material to work with. We're not just talking about how your day was or your week. We want to see what your system is doing, what your system is guarding against. And typically it's guarding against fear, pain, love, attention, affection. But those can't just be ideas. We've got to see them come alive in the body, because it's such a simple thing that if this man could tolerate a touch on the shoulder after every group, when somebody touches him and says, "Bye, John, see you next week," then over time, he's going to be able to tolerate a hug. Maybe not from everybody in the group, but one person a week.
Yeah, well, we did. It was very interesting. What really triggered him, where I asked him, why are you isolating so much? It came off the fact that we did a love hammock.
Oh,
So all the men held the man
yeah.
together, and I got all the guys to say one thing, as if this was a little baby, what he never would have heard before. So they
Yeah.
said to him, and this other guy was frozen. It was wonderful, like a psychodrama without it being a psychodrama. And he had this experience of being able to witness something that it was just a new experience for him, to see intimacy with men.
So he was frozen just watching it?
Just watching it.
Wow, that's intense.
And it was, he came out of it, and then we talked through and we extended it a little bit. But this is this is an extreme maybe for the people watching, that someone would have this, but we may have this in small amounts. Right. It may not be
that extreme. Yeah,
we may be avoidant. We may not. It's like there's lots of some people, you may have an addiction that might be very apparent. Where you soothe yourself instead of touch. You soothe yourself with shopping online. Right. Or soothe yourself with porn, or you soothe yourself with alcohol, or soothe yourself with the next big project at work that will then you'll be recognized and approved. All these ways that we can distract ourselves from intimacy. I suppose that's what we're talking about here, Doc.
Right, and intimacy with the self, because this is an inside job always. And I hope people can hear when you're talking about the power of a group therapy. The power when two or more are gathered. We cannot fix these things by ourselves at home alone. We just don't. We don't operate that way. We are creatures that need other human beings to help us through whatever we're going through. And I'm just really struck by this man that you're talking about, because if he stays in that group over time, he will be able to tolerate intimacy in the form of affection and touch and kind words. He may never be able to do it the way that other people can do it, but he'll be able to do it the way that he can do it. That helps him be less isolated, less lonely.
And and again, this is something out there for everybody to kind of understand, that this one example of a man who's scared of touch, and and his frozenness and his fears. That part of him resides in every other man in the group on some level. And it's like for him to realize that, like to know that we're not alone, that we all have our struggles, is huge. You know, like we do have to feel some pain, but we really don't need to be alone with it. But we often create a life where we end up being alone with it. And especially if you're a lonely single man, unable to be with your loneliness, you know, because, you know, it's like you can't, you know, you're not able to be with your loneliness if you're isolated and alone. I haven't come across that too often.
No, you will medicate it away some way. You'll either stare at the TV for hours on end, or drink beer, or find some way to, you know, compulsively overeat. You'll just keep dulling and dulling and dulling is what happens.
Yeah, and so so these are some of the things that that's required here. You know, where we're today we're looking at how people can, what is it that comes together to create a dynamic where one pulls away from a relationship. Although you don't need to be in a relationship to be happy, but what the statistics are is that men are more happy, as you said, in relationship, but they're much less happy when they're single.
Yeah.
And especially over the age of being single, because this is between 25 and 45-year-old men.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And it's like the level of happiness. Women are actually more happier. Who would have guessed it? Being single than men are.
Well, I think that's part of the problem now also, is that women, you know, there are studies that show that, you know, even later in life when a spouse dies, that women do just fine alone because they have girlfriends and they have daughters and, you know, grandchildren or what have you. They have community, and it's easier for them to be in community than it is for men because of this communication issue and the way that we're different. And so men really need to work hard to find a community. It doesn't just have to be with a woman. It can be in a fellowship of people. The main thing is that you are not isolating and alone. So go give service, find volunteer work, whether it's with people or with animals. Do something so that you have a community of concern. You know, people notice when you don't show up or you're not around, because they care about you. And letting people care about you is a big deal too, so that you're not just, you know, the strong silent type alone in the middle of nowhere. Like that's there's some sort of valor in that. There's not.
Yeah, no, I know that one from history, that part of me that used to do that. And today I had this wonderful experience, which is every Friday for me. You know, I meet a brother, and I laugh and cry with him. And
That's great.
Today I laughed with him a lot, and we cooked salmon together, and it was beautiful.
That's
and
nice.
It's locked in, and it's every week. Like I need that time for me to be a good enough father,
right.
a good enough husband. I'm not going to the pub with him, although maybe once every 6 months we might think of that, or go there for one or two. But that's not our thing, you know. It's really just like, you know, we did yoga together today, and it's like
it's your relationship with him is what it is. And you know, there's something so beautiful in that vulnerability, that there's no homophobia. Or what does it mean? It just means that we're two human beings, like brothers, really, who do things together, whatever those things are.
And I understand for the people watching might say that's a bit gay, because I know that voice, because I used to be that guy.
Yeah.
To be a guy when I was 22 years of age and a man hugged me, I was looking around hypervigilantly, thinking people thought I was gay because it was so gay. I didn't know what affection was then. And for anybody who, again, struggles with affection or loneliness or being single or being socially sort of anxious, the medicine is affection. The medicine is empathy. And if it feels foreign, as the doc said, one's little small movements towards the other, or if it feels so hard, then reach out for support. Reach out for professional help, where you can have a relationship with the therapist and use that as a bridge to the world. Because if you can do it with the therapist and be open and be vulnerable, then you could start to maybe take that outside of the therapy room. But it's so important. It's so
It
important.
is, and I think it's extremely important for men to have relationship with other men so they can heal their relationship with their fathers and their masculinity. And it's just when I see it in my own groups, the love that these men have for each other is so moving and so beautiful and so caring. And most of them did not get it from their fathers. They come into those groups afraid of other men, not trusting other men. There's all this, kind of bullshit jockeying for position, right? All the alpha mailing that goes on. And at some point, all that gets dropped so
Yeah.
that they can actually be people. And you don't have to worry about whether you can kick somebody's ass or not. I'm sure you can. So you don't need any more of that. What you need more of is a heart opening, more
Yeah.
of your vulnerability coming forward, because that's really where your strength is being an integrated man, not someone who's engaging in these toxic masculine old ideas.
Yeah. Yeah. These outdated hand-me-downs that don't work anymore. And
Yeah.
yeah, it's so important. It's so important for anybody who's listening who is or knows somebody who is alone or isolated and not in relationship, that instead of jumping in and thinking that we can work it out with another person in a romantic relationship right away, that there's small steps that you can take along the way. And that's starting to build up a friendship, starting to
Mm,
enter a group. Because let me tell you, and I've seen it thousands of times, is that if you can feel trust, even if you come in with distrust, that when people tell their stories and you feel the authenticness of that, then it impacts you over time, and then you feel trust, and then there's a real possibility of feeling a sense of belonging. Some of what that you may have never felt in your own family of origin, that might be a big part in the reason why you're so alone at this time, almost reenacting your life as a child. So that by these small steps towards a therapeutic community, or at least stepping out and going for a coffee with a friend and sharing something that's other than I'm okay, could be a start. Definitely would be heading in the right direction.
for
Um,
sure.
so everybody, this is we're just coming to the end here for tonight, and just a final word, Doc, on just a small recap on what you feel is important if someone's watching here and they're struggling with they want to come out of the cave.
Mm.
What would be they would have a want to do that.
Yeah, if you have a want to get out of your isolation, if you're in pain because you're isolated, the first step is admitting that you're isolated and that you're lonely and alone and you don't want to be. And I think oftentimes people are afraid to say what they really want, that they want a partner or they want a family because they have so much shame about that. So maybe the first thing is to sit down with a notebook and make a list of the things that you want, that you're afraid to have, or even afraid to voice to another human being. And then see if you can find a 12-step fellowship. There are so many free ways of getting help today. These are self-help groups that are free. They're thematic, whether they have to do with food, alcohol, sex, drugs, gambling, codependence. If you're an adult child of an alcoholic, there are groups for that also. So see if one of those fits for you, and just go to them. Go and listen for the similarities, not the differences, and see what it feels like to be in a group of like-minded people if you find them. If that doesn't work for you, find a therapist that has a group therapy that you can join, or a community counseling center. Ideally, you would go in person because if you're avoidant, Zoom is the easiest way to do it. But if that's a way to wade in, that's okay too. And then see if there's one person in your community that you can make conversation with, whether it's a grocer that you see every day or every week, it's a woman that you see at a coffee shop, that you'd like to ask if you can just join her for a cup of tea, and just get curious about her, ask her questions, and have a conversation, not with any intention other than to walk away to see what that felt like. She's not going to be the woman of your dream. She's not going to save your life. She may never want to see you again. That's okay. It's none of your business. What matters is that you have an experience of yourself through other human beings. And then, finally, if you can afford it and you're inclined, find a therapist. Find a therapist that you can learn to get into a relationship with, that you will learn to trust, dislike, have arguments with, repair, just like a real relationship, so you can start to sort things out that way.
That's so powerful. Really good steps towards coming back to yourself and coming back into a relationship. Thank you, Doctor.
You're welcome. Thank you, Nigel.
And for everybody watching, thank you for taking the time. And again, if if you know someone who could be struggling, please share this video with them. If you liked any of the content, please hit subscribe or share or like. That really helps us reach more people. And again, thank you for tuning in. It's been, I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I did. So take care, everybody, and we'll see you next week. I'm not sure what time, but we'll be next Thursday. We'll be back. So take care and don't be alone. Thank you. See you, Doc.
Bye. Thank you.